Welcome to Out of Our Shells. My name is Emily M. Chung, and I'm here today with Hilary Agro. This is a podcast about awesome women who do awesome things, and you are an anthropologist, right?
Yes.
What exactly in anthropology is it that fascinates you?
So, yes, I'm an Anthropology PhD student, and anthropology, it's the study of people, basically, which, yes, is very, very broad and encompasses everything. There's a bunch of sort of subcategories of anthropology. Archaeology is the one that most people have heard of. Basically, archaeologists study human garbage.
The things that are left over.
From across our history.
Yeah.
I'm a cultural anthropologist, so I study human culture and sort of real live existing humans and how we interact. And specifically, I study drug users, drug use, drug policy, and the way it impacts and affects drug users. And yeah, I find anthropology super fascinating because, I almost went into primatology, the study of primates, like non-human primates.
Yeah.
But I had to pick a primate to study, basically, if I was going to continue in that direction. And humans are the most interesting primate. Like, all primates are interesting, but humans are really interesting.
Yeah, you can talk to us too.
Yes. That's a benefit. I love staring at monkeys. I could do it all day, but yeah, it's a little more stimulating to actually talk to people. Yeah, so yeah, I find humans to be really fascinating and beautiful. And so, the more that you study humans, when you also put sort of empathy into your work and study humans in terms of like, okay, we're this really great, interesting species, but we're also really shitty to each other a lot of the time. You start looking at the problems.
Yeah.
And long story short, I ended up, landing on drug policy because it's really broken in our society.
Drug policy. So go back in the history. That's what I'm interested in. I've talked to you about this before, and every single time I talk to you, I feel like I learned something brand new. How did it all start?
For me personally?
No.
Or drug policy?
For drug policy.
Okay.
Well, let's go there, and we can just see how you got it.
That's a big one. So it's important to when you're talking about drugs to first think about like what is a drug. If you like most people when you hear the word drugs you think of like cocaine and heroin, all the illegal ones. But a drug is anything that impacts and affects our body and affects our consciousness. And so coffee is a drug, caffeine, it's the most commonly used drug. Alcohol is a drug, in terms of like recreational functional drugs. And so it's hard to really talk about how drug policy began because it's like humans have been using drugs since the dawn of time. We've been using psychedelics, like mushrooms and stuff like that. We've been using caffeine. We've been using alcohol. We've been using tobacco. As long as there have been humans, and in every culture all over the world, there have been drugs that people have used, either medicinally or just for fun, recreationally.
Yeah.
But basically around the time that capitalism was really getting going and the drug trade through capitalism and colonialism, it was all really entangled. So there was a trade in alcohol and tobacco and sugar, which is also a drug, that was happening for hundreds of years. And then, let's say in Canada, because drug policy happens differently in different countries, in Canada specifically, why certain drugs started to become illegal, because they weren't before, were in the late 1800s, early 1900s, Canada built all our railways.
Okay.
Right? I promise this connects to drugs.
Yeah. It's all intertwined, I'm sure.
Yeah. So Canada started building its national railway system, and to do that, they brought in a whole bunch of Chinese laborers. This cheap labor that they could exploit because they were immigrants. They had no rights, and so they brought in all these laborers to exploit. They built the railroads, and then when the railroads were done, they were just like, okay, like bye. Like there was no social support for all these Chinese laborers. There was no, they were just there now. The economy slumped when the railroads were done, and there were all these Chinese laborers that also needed jobs. They lived in Canada, they had families, and the white laborers back in the day, because Canada has always been a very racist country, based on these interactions, these white laborers got really mad that the economy was slumping. They started blaming the Chinese laborers, and there was a big riot here in Vancouver.
Oh, really? Wow.
And a bunch of Chinese businesses were all smashed up.
Oh, shit.
And yeah, this was in 1908, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, long story short, it was William Lyon Mackenzie King, who came in and said, okay, what are we going to do about like this big riot that affected all these Chinese businesses and everything? And he decided that the solution, instead of like dealing with the white laborers who were doing this, or, you know, the actual landowners that were, you know, making it difficult for all of the laborers to be economically successful, he decided, let's make opium illegal, because opium is what Chinese laborers are smoking, and it's probably making them crazy, so we're just going to make it illegal. So our drug laws began as a racist way of allowing police to discriminate against Chinese laborers.
No way, really?
Yeah. So, sorry, this was a bit longer than... drug policy is complicated, it's racist, like... It's yeah, that's the reason why our very first drug laws in Canada were implemented, and it was a similar story in the U.S. with cannabis and opium. So as these drug laws, as politicians and landowners started realizing that they could control various populations that they wanted to control using these drug laws, they implemented more of them, because they were like, okay, like, hey, if we make the drug that these Chinese communities use illegal, and that allows us to take away their businesses and, you know, do whatever we want with them, put them in jail, break up their families, you know, then we can do it to other populations too. It was illegal in Canada for Indigenous people to drink alcohol until the 50s.
Wow.
And it was just another form of social control. And so all of our drug laws are steeped in this really racist history. So today, when you think of drug laws as like, opium is illegal, heroin's illegal, cocaine is illegal, none of those things are illegal because it's good for society or because it keeps us safe. It's actually illegal because it allows the government to specifically target different populations of poor people, working class people, and racialized people.
Wow.
Yeah, sorry, I kind of went wide with it.
That's exactly it, right? And then we as a population, we just don't know this history.
And that's the thing. You're born into a society where drugs are illegal, and you just kind of assume it's because, they're bad.
They're bad, yeah.
If they were, then like alcohol would be illegal too. Why is alcohol legal and all the other ones aren't? Like, we just legalized cannabis. All of a sudden, we're realizing that, for years and years we've been putting people in jail for growing, selling, and consuming cannabis. And we shouldn't have, because it's like, it's a plant.
Yeah.
So, we need to sort of extend that logic to other drugs too, and be like, okay, why are these things illegal? Why do we not want to let people put in their bodies what they choose to? And yeah.
Do you think that the conversation is going that direction, or do you think they're kind of like cut it off of cannabis and then everything else just kind of stays how it is?
Hopefully. I mean, I'm not only an anthropologist and academic. I'm an activist, and there are many drug policy activists and drug users who are pushing for these things, especially opioid users, because they're the ones who get affected by these laws the most right now because of the toxic supply.
What are all the opioids?
Oh, all of them? There's a lot.
There's a lot, yeah.
I can't name them all, but so an opioid, that's going to be like heroin is probably the most famous one. Fentanyl is the next most famous one that most people have heard of, because it's basically like a super potent form of an opioid. Like, it's something like 100 times more potent than heroin. I shouldn't throw numbers out if I don't know them for sure, but
yeah.
They all come from the opium plant, like poppies, and they're a painkiller. A lot of people need them to help with physical pain, emotional pain. They can be really helpful for that, but they're also very addictive. But because we have this toxic, illegal supply, most people can't access them legally. The illegal supply it's totally it's toxic, it's tainted, and so there's a lot of people who are dying. So anyways, once again, I keep going dark with this. Like, drug policy is like, I study recreational drugs. It's a really fun topic too, but there's also just a really dark side.
Well, there is a dark side one. I mean, do you think that something like heroin, for example, you as a just a general population person, you hear of heroin, you think bad. Is it essentially inherently bad?
No,
because it is addictive?
No. It's a good question, because most people have that question, but there's no drug that's inherently bad. Every single drug that exists has a beneficial, positive use that it can be applied for. Like heroin, I have a daughter. I gave birth last year via C-section, and part of the pain medication that they gave me when I gave birth was fentanyl. Like it's a medicinal drug.
Right. Yeah.
Opioids are very powerful painkillers. Even stuff like cocaine. Cocaine is extracted from coca leaves, and coca leaves are used in the Andes to combat altitude sickness. They're used as like a stimulant.
That when I was there,
methamphetamine. A lot of people think that meth is really bad, but there's a legal form of it that's used for various medicinal purposes, including ADHD medications. So every single drug, even all the bad ones, there exists a form of it that is used beneficially.
Right.
So, but because these things are illegal, most of the people who need them and use them don't have access to those good
clean versions.
To those good forms. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a big mess. Yeah.
So how did you get into studying this then? What was your clicking point?
So, all right. So here's the truth. There's two stories that I can tell about why I became interested in drugs and drug policy. There's the story that I can say that makes me sound very professional. Both of the stories are true.
Yes.
So one of them, the professional, good-sounding one, is that I took anthropology in my undergrad, and I became interested in medical anthropology, which looks at like the social determinants of health, like not just like, there's this is how you get a disease, like the biological reasons, but the social causes, like poverty,
right, yeah.
and that kind of thing. And I started looking at HIV/AIDS and how that's tied in with injection drug use, and the way that injection drug users tend to be discriminated against and stigmatized. And so, it's and just for the form that they use, their preferred
seen as
drug of choice. If you inject a drug, then you're, XYZ slurs and bad names. But if you go to a bar and drink your drug, then you're fine. And so that got me interested in drug policy and the way that we treat drug users. Okay, so that's the first version, which is true. It's true.
Yeah.
However, simultaneously, and I increasingly, as I go further in my career, I feel that it's important to talk about my personal experiences with these things. Simultaneously, I've been a drug user for years, since I was 15 or whatever. And everyone's a drug user. If you drink alcohol, if you drink coffee, you're a drug user. But I used more than just alcohol and coffee, and particularly a group of drugs called psychedelics had a very strong impact on me personally.
Absolutely,
and my mental health and my general sort of well-being. When I was a teenager, I experienced a very severe depression for like 3 years. I was self-harming.
Wow.
I was in a really bad place. I had to repeat a few classes in high school. I almost dropped out. And I was in a super bad place, and I tried lots of different antidepressant medications. One of them kind of worked, but it was really when I was like 19 and 20, exploring psychedelics that helped me. And psychedelics right now are being looked at as these really powerful tools to help
absolutely
people's
for
mental health.
therapy, yeah.
And and that's kind of the work that I do now for my PhD, is looking at the way that psychedelics are helping people outside of the medical system, because we have this medical system, and psychedelics are finally, and by psychedelics I mean psilocybin mushrooms, LSD, acid, and a whole bunch of other ones. the medical establishment is looking at these drugs as really powerful tools, but there's also like millions of people who are using these drugs outside of the medical establishment, and they're using them illegally, but they're super beneficial and have helped them out in a lot of different ways. And so for me, they've been so helpful to me personally, that, and yet I'm not stigmatized in the same way that injection drug users are.
Right.
You know, like, because I'm a young white woman who's like successful and whatever, people don't look down on me in the same way that they look down on other people who use drugs. It all just kind of came together to make me ask these questions of like, what is going on with our drug policy? Like, why? Why is this so messed up? Why is it like I can, you know, drop acid with a bunch of my friends and have this amazing, beautiful day, and we're closer together, and we have such a great time, and I learn about myself, I learn about the world, and it's a fully positive experience, and a cop could arrest us at any moment for this. Like, it makes no sense at all. It doesn't. However, they probably wouldn't arrest us because people who use psychedelics in, you know, these kind of like middle class indoor environments and at raves and stuff, they're protected. They're not the ones who are getting arrested, but the people who live on the downtown east side who are underhoused, they don't have homes, they have to use their drugs on the street instead of in the safety of their homes or in bars and stuff like that like the rest of us do. They're the ones who are getting arrested. None of this makes sense. It's all super unfair, and so that's what made me want to dig into it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can totally understand where that. So what was your first psychedelic experience like?
I wish I could remember.
There's been so many since.
Well, no, honestly, like, so for my master's research, I interviewed a bunch of people and I asked them that same question. Yeah. And some people have the most amazing stories where, you know, like one guy that I talked to, he did no drugs at all until he was 30 years old. And the first drug that he tried was 2 hits of acid.
Oh, wow.
And so he remembers that very well. And his story is amazing. Wow. I wrote about it in my thesis. You can find it online. And yeah, so some people have really amazing stories of these transformative events of their first time. But honestly, my first time, I think I was like 16. And it was fun. I was at a party or something.
Did you search it out, or did somebody find it like...
there's friends just like around and stuff. Yeah. I don't want to get into too much detail about it because and that's the thing. It's like I can't even like fully talk about my own personal drug use because it's not super safe, and there's still a lot of stigma and professional consequences that you can have from talking about your drug use, which is why people don't talk about it. But I think it's important to, for people who use illegal drugs to talk about their own experiences as much as they can, because that destigmatizes the idea that only, you know, certain groups of stigmatized people use drugs. Like, we think of drug users and you can imagine the type of stereotype that people go to. So I do think it's important for people like me who are safer to talk about drugs and destigmatize that. However, I'm only a student. Like, I travel, and like there's various...
There are still consequences.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't really want to go into it in too much detail, but I will say that, you know, when, even though I didn't have like my first like big transformative, oh my God, this is like, you know, changed my life experience, I did have some of those over the years, especially when I was like 19 or 20 and really sort of figuring myself out and getting out of my depression, and psychedelics were super valuable tools in that toolkit. They don't like solve all your problems when you take them, but they allow you to see the world and see yourself in a different way. You know, MDMA, for example, it's like the empathy drug, and it allows you to just have empathy and love for everybody, but that includes yourself. And a lot of people are really missing that in their lives, this looking at themselves with love and care and respect, enough to, you know, sort of forgive themselves for their imperfections, and to treat themselves with the respect that everybody deserves. Right. So that one was also very helpful.
Definitely. I think what I'm most interested in right now is ayahuasca. Do you know any much about that?
Yeah. So it's not, because I tend to focus on recreational drug use, which is a complicated thing. Like, it's not like there's like, these are the recreational drugs and these are the medicinal ones and whatever. But ayahuasca doesn't tend to be used recreationally because it makes you like shit your pants and vomit and stuff. Like
this I know, and I'm actually this is what I'm interested in. Like, it's not a good time experience. Like, it's a get over your demons experience.
Yeah, so it's made from some plants that are found in the Amazon. It's been used by indigenous groups for thousands of years as a medicinal healing experience. But before it works for most people, there's what I think it's like basically called a purge. Like it just messes with things. There's different sort of worldviews that would explain this in different ways. Some would say that it's it's getting out like
all the toxicity.
Yeah, it's getting out the toxicity. In other ways, it just messes with your system and makes you sick before it works. But basically, people aren't doing that at raves. Like people aren't like going home from work and being like, yeah, I'm gonna do ayahuasca tonight. Like I'm just gonna relax, watch TV. It's a very powerful.
And then vomit everywhere.
Yeah,
Woo!
it's a very powerful experience. But everybody that I've talked to that has done ayahuasca says that it's a super transformative thing. It's super powerful and therapeutic. It does have to be done under the right circumstances because you become so vulnerable in this state because it's so strong. You need to do it. You need to be guided by somebody who knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
But it's...
Is it also illegal? Because I've heard of a lot of people just going to a certain person who has been like certified to do this, a shaman or what have you.
It's legal in Canada. I know that peyote is legal in Canada, but I'm not actually sure about ayahuasca's legality. But yeah, because it's not. Here's the thing: because it's not being used en masse by like poor people and people of color, the government hasn't decided that it's a threat to the social order or that they can use it to arrest the people that they want to arrest. So whoever is using psychedelics in like therapeutic spaces at retreats and stuff like that, it's like wealthy middle class people who have access to that, and so the government's like, oh, that's fine, that's whatever, they're just doing their thing. But if it's something like like cannabis was, where they could just like arrest and control poor populations, or like opioids, then that's why it's gonna not just be illegal but actively sought after and arrested. Like even though psychedelics are illegal, they're not the ones that are targeted by police. You don't see that happening.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm not sure if ayahuasca's.
Yeah, I'm curious about that. I mean, it's one of those things where, I've been fortunate enough that I haven't ever had a negative drug experience. I haven't ever faced any demons that way. But from what I've heard about ayahuasca is that it really does whatever is there.
Yeah,
it digs it up, and I'm curious as to what that would be.
So I'm really interested that you say I've never had a negative drug experience, because this is a really this is a part of psychedelics that I think that we're trying to reframe, because it's commonly thought of as like, if you have a bad trip or whatever. And yes, like negative experiences on psychedelics can be really scary. And like I've had them and they're super not fun. And you start thinking about like the concept of death and mortality, and you can also just, they're powerful tools. They can make you very scared. Most of what you've heard about the negative stuff about psychedelics, and especially acid, has this reputation it doesn't deserve. Most of that stuff is garbage. It's fear mongering. Like, people don't regularly like jump off of balconies and like, you don't go crazy. You're not gonna have like, there's ridiculous stuff like, oh, it'll make like your spinal fluid drip into your, no, it's like, that's all.
Really?
No.
I haven't heard about that.
Yeah, it pokes holes in your brain, and then your spinal fluid drips in, and that's what causes acid flashbacks. It's complete, it's all BS. It's not true. But
yeah.
But they are powerful tools, and people can have negative experiences that can be very scary, because it puts you in a vulnerable state. You're thinking about different things that you don't always think about. And like you say, ayahuasca and things like mushrooms, it can bring up really dark stuff. And so what it does, and I've particularly found this for mushrooms, it'll pull up things from you that you were trying not to think about. And so, whereas it totally can be used to just have fun and have fun with your friends, whenever, psychedelics can be unpredictable, because it's going to bring stuff up. And if you've been avoiding this thing for a long time and you really don't want to deal with it right now, then it can be really dark and scary. However, if you go into it with this sort of like open mind and thinking, okay, I don't know what it's going to pull up. I might just sit here and eat oranges with my friends and giggle for 6 hours. Or I might have to think about, like my diet and nutrition and the fact that I've been eating poorly lately. Or I might have to think about this trauma that happened a few years ago. Or, it can bring stuff up. And so, but the thing is that's why it's important to do these things in safe environments with people that you trust, and when you're in a mindset where you're ready to handle anything that it brings at you. Exactly. It's honestly not, most people's experiences with psychedelics are genuinely positive. Like they're it's fun. It's, you have a lot of fun, you giggle and whatever. So it's not to say that, you're guaranteed to just like pull up a bunch of traumas and like have to just sit there and deal with it. But stuff can happen, and so it's important when you're doing it to be in a place that you trust and
with people that you trust
and just being willing to, like, anything that happens. If I have to think about some things that I've been avoiding, then I'm gonna just
and it's a finite amount of time, right? It's not
yes, it ends.
Yeah. It does end. So it's not something that you need to be stuck with. Yeah. But I mean, when he does bring up those things, and it's good to realize that they're
and it's important, and it's and that's the case with any kind of like therapy. It's not fun when you're in it, but the whole point is that you feel better afterwards. Like, if you've been avoiding stuff, like, you take some mushrooms, it's going to tell you what you've been avoiding. Yeah. And you're going to work through it if you're open to it, and then it's going to be better in the long run.
Better in the long run, exactly.
Which is why psychedelics have been so powerful for so many people and have improved people's lives, because afterwards they're like, wow, and people are changed for good in really positive ways.
Definitely. Yeah. So you're a student now.
Yes.
And what is your thesis currently?
So I'm a PhD student. My master's, I studied the use of psychedelics, specifically in at raves in Toronto.
Oh, okay.
And so for my PhD research, I'm kind of continuing that, but I'm going to look at how people use psychedelics, specifically therapeutically. And also, I'm kind of looking at the way that drug prohibition impacts drug users. So, and the way that drug users resist prohibition. So, a lot of these things are illegal. Most of them are. But people who use psychedelics, they know how important they are, and they're not waiting for them to be legal to use them. They're setting up, retreats and therapeutic environments in which people can use them. There's medical practitioners who are administering psychedelics to people underground and under the table, kind of
interesting,
secretly, to help people with their traumas, because they're saying, no, the government's wrong. These things should not be illegal. People need to have access to them because they are profoundly transforming lives. And so they're resisting drug prohibition by just doing drugs and by giving them to people. And then there's this other group of people who are resisting prohibition in other ways, that are setting up things like safe injection sites for people who use opioids or injection drugs. These are drugs that are so stigmatized, and the users are so stigmatized that people have to use in really unsafe, unsanitary conditions. It's usually people who don't have homes to use in, or because the drug supply is so toxic, and people can overdose at any second because they're dealing with these opioids that are in such minuscule amounts. They're so powerful, and they're these tiny little amounts that just the slightest amount too much can make you overdose. So providing these sites, these safe consumption sites, allow drug users to have access to nurses and people who are on call to help them with overdoses, or just help them inject safely, and also just be indoors in a safe environment.
They have those in Vancouver,
yes,
right?
Vancouver opened up the very first one in North America.
Oh, really?
Insight, that Insight was the first one in all of North America. But there's others that have opened up across Canada, and the thing that I want to look at is the ones that are opening up that are unsanctioned. So Insight started as an unsanctioned site. It started with a bunch of drug users saying, fuck you, government, we're dying, we're going to do this.
Yeah.
And then they eventually, opened up a legal one. And so there's places in Toronto where that's happening as well. They're just, we're in an overdose crisis. People are dying every day. They need these safe sites to do drugs. And so we're just going to open it up and do it and just dare the cops to come arrest us. And there's been altercations with police and all this kind of thing. But what I'm basically studying are drug users of all kinds. So from psychedelics to opioids, who are defying our laws, defying prohibition to do what they know is the right thing to do, which is to give people access to these drugs in safe spaces. So that's what I'm looking at for my PhD research.
How does one study something that is still legal?
Yeah.
like officially as a part of your that must be an interesting line to
well, so this is the other reason that I love anthropology, the kind of work that I do. So I do a kind of research that's called ethnographic research.
Okay.
And so what that is you go and live with people and spend time with people. So you're not just interviewing them, which I do. I'll do sit down interviews with people. But I'm also going to go do activism. I'm going to be there. I'm going to, help out with whatever they need at safe injection sites. I'm going to, be there at protests. I'm going to go to city council meetings where they need me to be there. I'm going to use my body and my presence and leverage, my power and my time to help with the activism that these people are doing. And I'm also going to hopefully, spend time with people who are doing psychedelic therapy. And I'm just sort of figuring out the project right now to see what I can and can't do, what I can have access to. But yeah, you actually go and you're there, to understand people's lives, you have to kind of go. And so anthropologists used to, the way anthropology started was, it was white colonialists going to exotic places, and they'd live with the locals and the natives, and they'd come back and write a report and give it to the colonial government, who would use it to further oppress those natives. But now, we retain the spirit of the idea that to understand people's lived experience, you have to be there and talk to them and do things, get your hands dirty. And also it's really important as an academic who will be, getting knowledge from these communities, to give back. I'm not just going to sit there and just listen to them and then go write up my stuff. I want to go do stuff. If they need me to stuff envelopes or knock on doors or show up with a sign and protest, that's what I'm going to do, because I have a year's worth of time and energy to give to this project. And so, more academics need to be doing that. If you're studying people and extracting knowledge from those people, you better fucking help out with what they need.
Agreed. Yeah. That's fun. Wow.
And it also allows you to get different knowledge, because by actually going and doing that stuff, I've been doing drug policy activism for a long time. So, I have a sense of what it's like already. But when you actually go there and listen to people who, people who've been using heroin for a decade and who just need housing in order to, get their lives together, and it's not the drug use that's a problem for them. It's poverty. It's discrimination. It's racism. It's colonialism. When you go and listen to people and really be there in those spaces and be physically close to people, you just learn more. Right? You learn better than and I think that other ways of studying are important, like history and sociology, and there's different ways that you can gather data and learn about people. But the actual physical act of being near people and interacting with them and sharing food, sharing conversations, you just learn so much more.
Yeah.
So
how has this affected your own life, your own sense of being?
It can be very stressful because drug policy affects people, and people are dying every day. The more that you learn about it, the more you realize how awful our prison system is, where we put people who use and sell drugs, we throw them in prison, and then we act like we're just calling it a day. We're acting like that's a solution to the problem of addiction and poverty, and that's not. And so we're just further traumatizing people. And you just, have to learn about these things, and it can be very stressful. But it's also a really, it's beautiful to interact with people in a way and learn about the way that they resist and their power and their strength and the way that people don't give up. The way that people fight for their rights and their dignity. I don't know. I love doing it because, it all comes back to the fact that I think people are really interesting. Like, has there been human beings are fascinating, and I like hanging out with them and like learning about them.
Yeah, so, absolutely. Yeah. Has there been sort of a pivotal person for you that sort of changed your direction or a mentorship or something that?
Yeah, a lot of people through my life. I think that when I was a teenager, I got a lot of help from teachers and my mom and people to lift me out of, there was a social worker who helped me out, my doctor, to lift me out of my depression. And I think that it's interesting looking back on it now, the kind of resources that I had access to as like a middle class white woman, that not everybody has access to, like this really great doctor and social worker, and my teachers cared about me and saw potential in me that they wouldn't necessarily see in other kinds of people. So I've been helped out by so many people, but I need to, it's interesting when you start looking at it as like, why me and not others? Like, why was I like a total like messed up kid in high school, and I am where I am now, married with a kid, I speak 3 languages, I've been to like 1 million countries, and I'm successful, but I could easily have been like anybody who is on the downtown east side right now struggling. Right. Because I had access to institutional and structural supports that they didn't. But, then in university, I had a lot of people, I think of a lot of professors. Like, this is a really, like, stereotypical, like, academic way to answer a question about people that I look up to, like my professors. But I did have a lot of professors. And you know what? I think the people that I look up to, they're not just people that I learned stuff from. Like my supervisor, Kim Clark, and Peter Stevenson, and Eric Roth at the University of Victoria. The people that I remember the most are not just people I learned stuff from. They're people who were there for me in times of stress. They're people who I went to their office bawling because of like whatever, like school stress and whatever, and they were kind to me. So I think that the most impactful people in my life have been people who were kind and were just open-hearted and nice when I needed them to be. And so I think that has really impacted me more than anything else. Is just like, I want to be like those people who just opened up their time and hearts to me when I needed it. I want to be that for other people. I want to do that as much as I can.
No, it's amazing what those kinds of experiences, especially those people who are kind, like you said, can change. Like, I had this singing teacher, and she took me on when I was a kid, and had I not met her, and had she not given of her time, like she was retired and gave me singing lessons for free, I would never be where I am today. She was that person who saw something in me and kept me going that direction. And I mean, I have everything to thank for.
And you probably don't remember like the times that she taught you about this scale and that. Like you remember like the general energy that she gave you, right? And so that's, I remember when I was learning about public speaking, one of the things that stuck with me the most is nobody's going to remember exactly what you said, but they will remember how you made them feel. And I try to sort of like take that into everything that I do, mostly because yes, I want to help other people and make them feel good, but when you're using emotion to teach, it's important because we need more empathy, not just for one-on-one individuals, but like for people as a whole. We need, like, drug users are so dehumanized. We need to see them as people who are worthy of love and care and respect, instead of just people who are, whatever, a drain on society, throw them in prison. Drug users and drug sellers too. There's a lot of people who are like, oh, drug users are innocent, but drug sellers, they're all bad. Drug dealers. Right. No, they're people too who are doing the best that they can. And are really very difficult circumstances in a lot of cases, and in other cases, they're providing a service that people want. Like, everybody who uses a drug got it from somebody who sold it to them, and they wanted it.
Yeah, exactly.
So, so taking that empathy and extending it to people and showing and teaching people that, like, if we approach, you know, social problems with empathy and not just, like, write people off, and approach these things with, like, care and love, that we can actually make an impact. And it opens you up to different learning too, because if you just assume that drug users or drug dealers are all evil and whatever, then that cuts you off from learning about why people sell drugs. And so if you want to be a person who, like, learns and has knowledge about the world, you can't just assume that anyone's doing anything because, you know, they're just shitty or evil or you know, you can't accept those narratives.
Yeah, especially when you haven't done the research yourself or, like, actually gone and talked to them about it.
So I'm not saying that we need to, like, go and hug a bunch of Nazis, but at the very least to, like, understand where people are coming from. The people that you generally tend to, not you, but, like, the people that people tend to write off. It's better to understand, and sometimes you will understand them and realize that, like, oh, I was wrong to judge this group of people. Sometimes you'll understand them and go, okay, I understand you now. You're still garbage and you need to stop. But at least, you know, going into it with, like, understanding where some people are coming from is,
definitely. So do you think, like, now as a is there like a global movement, hopefully, to make this? You said that there are, what you're studying is people who are resisting this like drug policy in general. So is it mobilizing in some kind of way?
Yeah, it is. Not as quickly as we'd like. You know, there was a movement in the 70s to legalize cannabis in Canada, and a lot of people were like, yeah, it's, like, right around the corner, like, and it was another 40 years before we actually did anything. So I don't want to be too optimistic, even though it feels like there's a movement. It feels like something is happening. Yeah. But it's felt like that before. So I don't want to get too ahead of myself. However, the legalization of cannabis in Canada is huge. It's a really big deal. It's because what that does, it doesn't just make it so that we can't arrest cannabis users and sellers anymore, or most of them. Which is important. What it will hopefully do is it's going to change the way that people think about illegal drugs. So if your whole life it's been, these are the legal drugs, these are the illegal drugs, and that's it, then it's hard to imagine a world where that can change. Right. However, right now we have an entire generation of people who were here to witness when one drug went from illegal to legal overnight. And so what that'll do, hopefully, is get people to think, okay, well, wait, what other drugs do we have that are illegal that should be legal? Wait, if this, you know, it's going to challenge people's kind of, like, conceptions of these categories. Right. And so that's what drug policy activists are trying to sort of capitalize on. Yeah. And we have other ways that, you know, drug policy is being chipped at from all sorts of different directions, and one of them is psychedelics. Like, we're finally able to study them medicinally. People are talking about them. People are writing articles about them. People are curious about psychedelics now. And so hopefully with that, we'll go along the question of, like, well, why are they illegal? And then you have another direction, which is we have an opioid crisis right now. Sorry, it's not really an opioid crisis. It's an overdose crisis. Yeah. And that is making it so that we have bodies. We have thousands of people who are dead now, who should not be dead, and who wouldn't be dead if they had access to a safe supply of the drug that they use. And so there's a lot of drug policy activism that's happening because of how many people, and this is really morbid and awful, but how many people are dead now. There's a lot of dead people with families who are questioning, why is my child, my sister, my brother dead now because of these policies. And so there's a growing movement of people who are trying to draw attention to this issue and the issue of giving people a safe supply of the drugs that they use.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's being chipped at from a lot of different directions, and the work that people are doing is super inspiring. And, there's a group called Mothers Stop the Harm, and this is mothers whose children have died of overdoses. And what's really good about this is, the whole thing is terrible.
Yeah.
But what's important about their movement is that instead of blaming the drugs, they're blaming drug policy. They're blaming the rules.
That's crazy.
They're looking and they're saying like, no, it's prohibition killed our children, which is true.
Mm-hmm.
So so we are seeing some movement. There's pushback, and it's a push and pull kind of process. But this week on Tuesday I'm going to a conference in St. Louis, Missouri, where drug policy activists and researchers from all over North America go to talk about these things. And there's a lot of movement, and people are working really hard.
That's great. Is it something you're invited to, or do you just go?
No, I'm just going because it's a great conference and I want to go. Usually I have kind of a rule that if I'm not speaking at a conference, then I don't go, because they're expensive and you got to get there. But this conference is so good. It's like all of these drug policy activists from all over, and they come together, and like the energy that we're like sharing different tactics. You learn a lot. There's people who have been incarcerated, people who have been in prison. There's people who are really directly impacted by this stuff who speak, and you get to hear them talk, and it's really great. So it's inspiring. Hopefully I'll come back with lots of new knowledge about the direction that these things are going in.
That's fantastic. So have you done a lot of speaking at conferences like this, or?
I've spoken at anthropology conferences, and just different kind of speaking stuff, talking about this. I like to, so whenever I give a talk, I like to open it up. I'm such a little shit. Like I love like I force people to learn like these things, no matter where I am. So I'll open up the talk by being like, so how many people in this room did drugs today? And a lot of people will raise their hand because they'll be like, oh, like whatever. I guess I have a medication or something.
Yeah.
And then I'll ask, coffee's included. So if you drank coffee today, you're a drug user and you did a drug, and everyone's like, oh no, yeah. And so it's very rare that that nobody in the room has taken a drug that day.
Right.
Tea, some people, would include sugar. So I like to, when I'm doing these public speaking, I like to poke at the audience and just, get them to reconceptualize, like, what is a drug,
Is there one thing that you wish the general public knew about drugs or drug policy that you've learned that you wish it was a normal fact?
Yes. A lot of stuff. I would say I wish that I wish that drugs didn't have such a bad rep. Like, I wish that we could all just accept that drugs are tools, and that, it's really, we need to reconceptualize it as, what is your relationship to drugs? Because very few people will not use drugs. Everybody has a relationship to drugs. The question should be, is your relationship to drugs healthy? Is it working for you and the people around you, or not? It's not whether or not you do drugs. It's how you do them and what your relationship is to them.
Right.
And so, I wish that more people, knew, I wish that more people would challenge the assumptions that they've grown up with about drugs. The idea that just say no and drugs are bad. Like, it doesn't even make sense, because you're never going to say no to drugs all the time. Like, you're going to have a drink, you're going to drink a tea, you're going to, most people like end up smoking a joint or something at some point in their lives. So it's not about saying no. It's about like being able to sort of like conceptualize your own relationship and like, is this healthy? Is this working for me?
Yeah.
Like, am I doing drugs in a way that's like beneficial? It's helping me work or study or whatever, or am I relying on it too much to work or study? With like Adderall and those kind of things, or like, am I using this drug to kill my pain because I have chronic pain and I need that, or am I using it to kill psychic pain that I could be dealing with in other ways?
Right.
These
Is that something people are I mean, I guess, are you able to be aware of those things, I guess, is
it's
the
hard.
question, right?
Yeah, it's hard. But that's the problem with the way that we talk about drugs and the way that we teach people about drugs, especially like kids and teenagers. We teach them to say no, and then when they don't, that's just like it. Then now you're a drug user, and there's nothing you can do. Like,
yeah.
It's so people aren't used to thinking about drugs in terms of what their relationship is to them.
Yeah.
And so it's difficult, but that's what I encourage people to do, is just like check in with yourself and with the people around you too. Because, you know, obviously there's some people who use drugs and they maybe think that they're fine, but it's impacting the people around them in really negative ways. So, but yeah, just reframing that in terms of like, yeah, checking in with yourself about your drug use instead of like, am I using or not being a guideline, because that's useless.
Yeah,
like, it's not...
Well, I mean, you have a daughter now.
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you have, but have you thought about how this conversation will come up with her?
Well, that's the question, right? I have all of these smart ideas about how I think that people should be approaching drugs, but like, is my daughter gonna be fine with the way I'm teaching her about drugs? We'll see in 18 or so years. Yeah, my daughter's 13 months old, so I've got lots of time to figure out what's the best approach. But I will say that all the people that I talk to in my research about their drug use, every time I ask somebody, you know, like, so where did you first learn about like drug education? Like, how was drug education in your school? Everybody always laughs because obviously it didn't work because they're a drug user now.
Yeah.
But it's just, yeah, the idea that we can just tell kids and teenagers, like, just don't use drugs and like that's going to work. Like, it doesn't. It's the same as telling them, like, don't have sex.
Yeah.
You can say that all you want, but it's not going to do anything. So we might as well teach them how to have sex safely and teach them about consent and stuff. That's how we need to be approaching drugs as well. We need to say, okay, like, yes, ideally you wouldn't use these things, you know, I guess ideally, and, you know, just don't use them. Although I could question that as well. But because most people are going to try drugs at some point, this is how to approach them safely. Yeah, so hopefully with my daughter, we'll see. Maybe she'll listen to this someday and be like, you had it all wrong, Mom. But, you know, I think that there's a lot of people who are just told no, and then when they're just told no and then they do it anyway, they don't do it safely.
Yeah, and then they also have the stigma against themselves, like, oh, I wasn't supposed to do this, I'm a bad person.
Yeah, exactly.
And then they live into that.
So we could tell kids, like, you know, or teenagers or whatever, like, don't smoke weed, which is true. Teenagers shouldn't smoke marijuana because it, your brain is still developing at that age, and it's a mostly harmless drug, but you really shouldn't be doing it at that age until you're kind of in your mid-20s, and your brain development has stopped. But
is that the same for psychedelics, or?
I'm not totally sure for psychedelics. I mean, I used them at a pretty young age and I was fine, but like I would still, recommend anybody wait to use any kind of drugs until you're in your 20s. However, some people are going to do it anyway. Yeah. And like, I'm not going to judge them. Like, I did too, and I turned out fine. But like, but the whole point is that like, we can tell them don't use cannabis. But some of them are going to. And so if we just say, no, don't use it, and then they're just like, okay, well, I want to anyway. And then we're just like, well, I don't care. You can figure that out on your own. Instead of being like, okay, well, you shouldn't use it, but here's how to use it safely. Like, don't smoke it out of a pop can. Like, you know, don't smoke it out, don't make a bong from a water bottle. Like, it's, you know, like these are the safer ways.
Apples.
And that's, apple pipes. You know, and so that's the concept of harm reduction.
Right.
And that's like a really driving thing in drug policy. And the world of drugs is like, how can we use these things and reduce the most amount of harm? So there's a range of ways to use every drug, from safest to most unsafe. You know, like if you're going to do heroin, taking it or like any opioid, taking it orally is better than snorting it, but snorting it's better than injecting it, but injecting it safely with a clean needle is better than using it. So like, and there shouldn't be any judgment for any of these choices. It's just what is safer.
You can take heroin orally?
Yeah, like in a pill.
Like a pill. Oh,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, like, well, I mean, not heroin generally, but like OxyContin and like
okay, other kinds of opioids.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and so like if you're going to take cannabis, like taking it orally, I think is the safest way. Although there's some dangers to taking edibles too because it lasts longer and it can be dosages. You know, but like I think vaporizing it is generally. I'm not a cannabis expert, but is generally safer than smoking it, and you know, there's all these different ways. And so if we're just telling people no, then they're not learning about the subtleties and these safe ways. And the internet is good now because there's a lot of really good information that drug users and people can look up that will counteract all the just like no's and lies. Like, you know, there's some anti-drug campaigns that legit just lie to people because they think that making drug use unsafe will prevent people from using drugs, which is super frustrating. So, you know, we're lucky that now people can go online to learn about drugs, and like there's sites like Arrowhead and the Reddit drugs subreddit is pretty good. And it's where communities of online people who use drugs come together and they share knowledge. Oh. And so people can access this knowledge, and it's great. It's way better than abstinence only, just say no. But yeah, we need more research on everything. And we can't research these things to find out what's the best way and the safest way of using them if we just continue to act like telling people not to use them is going to do anything. Like it's not. Like the war on drugs is a terrible failure. Like the idea that we can somehow stamp out drugs from our society goes against our entire human history of people using drugs forever. So don't ever let anybody tell you that the war on drugs is intended to stop people from using drugs, because it's never going to happen. Never, ever. And so we just need to accept that people are going to use drugs and then move from there into, all right, let's figure out how to use them safely.
Right. Yeah. I think it's been an interesting, I mean, my own experience with drugs definitely came at a later age. Yeah,
I know. I want to like ask you about yours, but that's the thing. I'm like, it's stigmatized. I'm like, I don't know how much you're willing to share on like a public podcast about your experiences. I mean, that's the thing.
I speak
like with, you and I had a very good experience.
We had a fantastic experience
on a thing. on a thing.
It was wonderful.
It was a thing.
It was wonderful, and I have these conversations with my friends, and some of my friends, especially in the classical musical world, you know, it's just not. Like, it's definitely like a drugs are bad in this box. Like, so what would
your like colleagues say?
Honestly, when they find out I've gone to Burning Man, they go, "Wait a second." And then they start asking me questions, and I'm like, I'm here to answer whatever questions you want. And it for me, it was definitely the knowledge that I thought you would either have to be balls out high or nothing, right? And it's like one or the other. But it's not the case. There are so many varying degrees where you can
just take a little bit.
You can just take a little bit, and then things are pretty, things are happy, like, and it's so you can range it that way, and so you can tailor your experience to wherever you are, or however comfortable you are, or what kind of experience you want to have, versus it just being balls out high or nothing.
Exactly, right? And you know what? It's interesting because that is a really big problem for a very popular drug called alcohol, because when you have this idea of our society, you can't drink alcohol ever at all until you're 19, and then boom, go nuts. Yeah. And so that's why we have this this culture of like binge drinking in universities, because these young people are finally able to access alcohol more easily. Yeah. And they haven't learned how to drink, and so they just go nuts, and there's alcohol poisonings, and there's all sorts of problems that happen. There's places in Europe, such as France, where it's more common to learn how to drink alcohol with your family. Yeah. And you have a glass of wine with dinner when you're a teenager or whatever. Like your family teaches you how to drink
and how to appreciate it as a
And so that's more of a cultural expectation, and so with that, there's way lower rates of like binge drinking and all these problems because you have to learn how to use drugs. Like you can't. It's a tool. It's kind of a skill, you know. Yeah. If somebody does, like, one person can do 2 tabs of acid and have a terrible time. They've never done it before, and if they haven't read about it, they don't have anyone teaching them or guiding them. Yeah. It's going to be a disaster. Other people can do 2 hits of acid and go to the mall and be fine. Yeah,
Yeah. It's one of those, like, I have a very interesting experience in the fact that I can't drink alcohol. I'm one of those Asians. I got it from my dad, that I cannot, like, I have been able to try alcohol, so I know what everything tastes like. I've learned that I have a 7-sip limit of tiny little bits of alcohol. And it's probably good because I always joke that I probably would be an alcoholic otherwise, because I really like the taste of alcohol. But my first experience on alcohol, it was one of those things where I think I had one Mike's Hard Lemonade. I remember what those were. Mike's
Everyone
Hard Lemonade.
remembers their one. They're like, oh yeah, peach schnapps. I can't do that anymore.
Mike's Hard Lemonade and like a few sips of martini, and I was gone. Like not drunk, not tipsy, just gone. Like seeing all of my visuals as like Polaroid negatives, like black with colored outs. I was projectile vomiting everywhere. My partner at the time, and his friend called me Puking McPukerson for like a year. And so because of that, I don't have this sort of history of drinking alcohol when I go out to have, so I'm an interesting case in that fact, is that I was not a regular drug user as far as alcohol is concerned from a teenage standpoint.
Yeah.
So when I came to drugs and I couldn't do, I can't have alcohol, it was a very adult experience. It was a very much like it wasn't just a part of, I'm going to go out and have fun with my friends, go to a bar and drink and then just, get blackout drunk and, go home kind of thing.
Yeah.
I've never had that experience. So it was very much a choice of, I would like to experience my brain like this and the world like this and what's going to offer me that. So it's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of fun sort of having those experiences and realizing that it certainly is like this sort of range of things that you can experience, and if you want to experience them or not, that's obviously a choice as well. But it's
and that's the important word, and that's like basically what I study comes down to is like the word fun. Like I'm sorry, I'm gonna say it. Drugs are fun. Like, they are. Like, this is, and it's, I'm not saying this to, like, it's important to say this, because if we don't acknowledge that, then we're not acknowledging the reality that's why a lot of, like, most people do it. Because they're fun. And we can't act like everybody who uses drugs is just because of addiction or just because of, trying to kill pain or whatever. Those are definitely uses, and those are important. But we also need to acknowledge that that's not how drugs are experienced by the majority of people who use them. And so it's important to accept that, and also if we're reframing things as like, this is the reality of drugs. If people don't have to like do no alcohol and then when you're 19 like drink a 2 for a beer, like it's you can just have a little bit, you can have sips, you have to learn how to do it. When you first try a psychedelic, like, you don't have to go in and do 5 grams of mushrooms. You can just take a little microdose, you can, people can teach themselves and teach each other and learn and make it a growing learning process. And by starting slow and low, like you say, way less chance that something's going to go wrong.
And I think it just comes down to having that choice. I mean, it's also a privileged choice to have, obviously.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But it's nice to, to say, okay, this is what I would like today.
And that's what's really interesting is when you at a rave, where most people are doing drugs that are not alcohol. Alcohol's there, but it's people go into it and they say, it's not how much am I going to drink tonight? Most people who just use alcohol as their recreational drug, it's just, these are your options, either drink a little or drink a lot.
Yeah.
And like that's your whole range of consciousness alteration, is how much booze am I going to put in my body. But when you have all of these other options, like at a rave, you're thinking like, oh, okay, am I going to do some GHB? Am I going to do some 2CB? Am I going to do some acid? Am I going to do some cocaine? Or like, how am I going to mix these things? And I found that people can often be a lot more careful because they have all this choice, and because and not everyone's careful. But a lot of people in these environments are, because you have this range of options and you have to know what stuff interacts. You can't take GHB and alcohol together. That's a very deadly combo. But then there's other stuff that most people say go really well together, you know, like acid and, you know, ketamine or whatever.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, like approaching these things is like, how am I going to alter my consciousness tonight? What is this going to do for me? What do I want out of this experience? It's much more conscious and thoughtful than just like, I just drink because it's in front of me and this is what everyone else is doing.
Yeah, exactly. And I find, I mean, at least from my experience of people who are on drugs, and if you consider, I think what I would want from this is for people to realize that alcohol is a drug.
Yes,
you know, and to classify it as a drug.
You're doing drugs, right? You're going to your safe consumption site on a Friday night and you're doing drugs.
Yeah, because people don't think of it like that.
Drug dealer is giving it to you across the bar.
Yeah. And that's what would change society in general, is but every single person that I know drinks alcohol on a regular basis, you know, either with dinner or, you know, to go out to dance on a Friday night. And
it's a very common drug.
Exactly, but nobody thinks of it as a drug.
No, nobody, and it even has its own vocabulary. You're not getting high, you're getting drunk, you know. And everything else is just considered getting high, but alcohol has this like
why has alcohol not been put in that category?
I mean, to be fair, it is a little different from a lot of other drugs because of the way that it can be produced in so many different ways. And so it's very ingrained in human society because you can produce it using potatoes or, you know, flowers or rice or, you know, just like all of these different plants. And so it's popped up independently all across human societies.
Right.
And so it's a very old drug. But people have tried to make it illegal, and it was illegal for a little while.
Right.
That
didn't work.
And obviously it failed. And that's the thing. It's like we realized, like, we tried to make alcohol illegal because there are a lot of problems that alcohol causes.
People get so much more angrier on alcohol than any other drug.
It's very well known among people who use other drugs that, like, alcohol is the scariest one.
Yeah.
And I've been around people who are on acid. I've been around people who are on meth. I've been around people who are on everything. And, like, alcohol is the scariest one on an average basis in terms of like taking a lot of it. But they tried making alcohol illegal for a little while and they realized like, oh, people are still going to do it. They're just going to do it unsafely and make it in their bathtubs and people are going to go blind from drinking. And it's the same thing that's happening now with opioids. We made opium illegal. We made like this basic painkiller illegal, and so people aren't going to stop doing it. They're just going to do like really condensed, super hyper versions of opium, which is heroin and fentanyl and carfentanil. And so, but for some reason with alcohol, we tried it, and then we realized, oh, people are still going to do it. Instead of drinking beer and wine, they're drinking hard liquor. Same thing. So we're going to back off on that and make it and keep it legal, allow people to do it, but just regulate it.
Right.
And that's what we should be doing with other drugs. It's keeping them legal. And it's not to say that everyone should just be able to walk into the acid store and buy acid or like, you know, there's this idea that people have that if we legalize all drugs that it's just going to be a free-for-all. But that's not the case with the legal drugs that we have now. It's like tobacco is legal. You're not going to go to jail for using it or selling it, but you have to you can only buy it and sell it under these particular circumstances. And we have like packaging and, you know, cannabis too now, and alcohol, and caffeine. Caffeine's the least regulated. It's just kind of everywhere. But we need to look at each drug individually and say, what is the best way to regulate this and allow people to have access to it, not put them in jail for using it or for selling it under, you know, certain circumstances. But each drug should have its own kind of approach, just the way we do with tobacco, alcohol, and caffeine.
What with cannabis now, how is it being offered? Because it's still not, you're allowed to sell it, but you're not. What exactly is it? Because I've heard that there's problems now because people who were selling cannabis before, it's really, really difficult to get some kind of license in order to sell it, and so, you know, everything's kind of gone a little backwards.
Yeah. So I'm actually not the best person to talk about cannabis policy because I'm not super embedded with that, and I don't know as much about that as other people do. But generally speaking, it's been difficult because, you know, people opened up dispensaries before it was legal because they were like, fuck it, this should be legal, and I'm gonna sell it, and, you know, which they had to defy the laws in order to get the laws changed, which is good. But a lot of legal dispensaries who followed all the rules that the government said they had to follow in order to become, illegal dispensaries to become legal ones. They followed all these rules, and the government is still not getting the paperwork through. Some of them have closed down, and they're just like waiting to open up, and they want to supply people, but they're just waiting for papers to come through. And so some of them are just like, screw it, we're just going to sell it anyway. But that puts their applications at further risk. And so, the transition hasn't been super smooth. The black market is still operating. People are still buying cannabis from their dealers for lots of different reasons. One, because it's easy. Sometimes they have a personal relationship with their dealer, their seller, and they just like getting it from them. They don't want to have to go to a store. Or just because in some places it's really hard to get cannabis right now because there's like one legal store like a 2-hour drive away. So like you're not gonna, so the rollout hasn't been perfect.
At least it's a step in the right direction.
But yeah, absolutely. It's important to at least recognize that like you can't be arrested for having a joint in your pocket anymore, and that's huge.
So. When we were living in Amsterdam, it was just so funny to be able to just like walk into a store and be like, "Hey, can I have this?" Okay, great, wonderful. Walk out.
but then it's also it's a matter of sort of like racial justice as well, because there's places where so I was in Denver a few years ago, and Colorado has legalized cannabis, but the rollout has really favored white, wealthy people because, so who were the people who were selling it before? It was people of color, Black and Latino men. They all have criminal records now because they're harassed and arrested by police based on these laws. And when they legalized cannabis, they decided to say that, you can only work in a legal cannabis store if you don't have a criminal record.
Oh.
Yeah.
So well, that's not helpful.
Yeah, so all the people who were providing cannabis to the community before are now cut off from the legal industry. And I think that's the case in some parts of Canada as well. Once again, I'm not the best person to talk to about cannabis policy, but I do know that, it's unless we offer reparations to the people who were in jail for years and years for selling cannabis before, it's not going to be, we're not going to achieve justice for these policies, because the war on drugs and prohibition has harmed people, continues to harm people all the time, and so we need to look at providing reparations to the people who have been harmed before. We can't just make it legal and be like, okay, it's fine. Like, oh, hi, I know there's like literally people in jail right now.
Are they allowed out?
For cannabis. Well, we got to get them out. Like, that's
exactly.
Did
it just like pop
the
up
the idea the argument is that like, well, it was illegal back then, like they broke the law, and so they have to, but like, no, okay, like, number one, fuck you. Number two, there's this idea that because it's illegal, like people conflating legality with morality. Just because it's illegal doesn't mean that it's wrong, right? Marrying somebody of a different race used to be illegal. That doesn't mean that it was wrong while it was illegal.
Right.
Like owning slaves, owning other human beings used to be legal. That doesn't mean that it was right. And so if we're making cannabis legal because it's the right thing to do, we can't just tell the people who broke the law before that because it was the law, like, too bad.
Too bad.
Like, no, that's not right. It's
you knew what you're getting yourself into.
The right thing to do is to provide reparations for these people whose lives have been destroyed by these laws. Yeah.
Indeed.
I could talk about this all day long.
I love it, and that's why I love talking to you. It's just because it just keeps on coming. And I'm tell me more.
I know it's big. It's a big subject. Like there's a lot.
It's so good. There's a lot to unpack. But
that's why it's so interesting, because it's this thing that most people don't think about. They just kind of assume like, oh yeah, drugs are illegal because they're bad, and it's like,
wait a second,
sit down, because I will tell you about. Yeah, it's
it's so good. It's so good. Okay. Before we wrap up here, one final comment from Hilary. What for anybody who's listening, what do you want them to know?
Well, if you're an officer of the law, I have never done drugs. I have never done anything illegal. All of my experience has been perfectly legal with illegal substances, such as coffee. Actually, no, I don't even drink coffee. But
no, neither do I.
yeah, no, I just think that if anyone's listening, the most important thing that I would love for you to do is if everything that I've said has made you think differently about drugs, then that's wonderful. I'm so glad that you're listening. Share this information with the people around you. It's really the most important thing that you can do is talk to other people about drug policy and why it needs to change and shift. If you are a person who uses illegal drugs and you don't want anyone in your life to find out, that's perfectly reasonable and normal. Its stigma is bad and real. But if you can sort of come out of the closet as a person who uses illegal drugs to people around you, if you can do that safely, it's a very powerful thing to do. I don't want to make this comparison too uncritically, but there is a bit of a comparison that you can make in terms of gay people and LGBTQ people, the queer rights movements. The most powerful thing politically that you can do is come out of the closet, because the more that people realize that their loved ones and friends and family are queer, the more that they realign their perceptions about what it means to be a queer person. There are some parallels that you can make to people who use illegal drugs. And so the more people that realize that those around you, just everybody that you see around you has a different relationship to drugs, and a lot of people use illegal drugs, the more we can destigmatize that. And I think it's the most important thing that you can do is, even if you don't feel safe coming out to people in your life as a person who uses illegal drugs, which is perfectly legit because there can be very serious consequences for doing that. If you can at least, share articles on Facebook, like learn more about this kind of stuff, and just talk to people, just ask, like, why are these things illegal? Like, just ask questions. I actually have a good article on my blog that it's about how to talk to people.
Oh, yeah?
About
Where would
drugs.
one find this blog?
You could just search Hilary Agro. I think it pops up pretty quickly on Google. But it's like Hilary Agro hilaryagro.wordpress.com.
Okay.
And Hilary has one L. But just talk to people, because we need to change as a society the way that we talk about drugs and the way that we talk about drug users. And this isn't just a matter of like, oh, we want to be able to use psychedelics and like get high and have fun. That's all important, but it's a matter of literally life or death for a lot of people. There's people who are going to die today in Canada, Canadian citizens and people who have friends and family and people who care about them, that are going to die of an overdose today because they can't legally access the drug that they need to survive.
Right.
And that's not okay.
That's not okay.
So we need to be talking about these things, and we need to, at the very least, if you can just talk to other people about it.
Social awareness.
And even better, like, come to a protest, actually, like, get involved, like, actually go do stuff and organize. I didn't even get to talk about capitalism in this thing.
Next time.
But that's a whole other one. That's what I would love people to do.
Yeah, excellent. Great. Well, thank you so much. This has been
Thanks, Emily.
Inspiring as always. And I love that you're tackling something big.
Yes.
And I hope that all of us can and we have all our passions and things, but the fact that your passion really does help society and help people.
Hope so.
Yeah.
Least I can do.
It's a good thing. It's a good thing.
Yeah.
Make the world better for Ella. Great. Well, thank you for listening, and have a fantastic day.